My son said, "Finally, we're splitting Mom's $8 million," and everyone laughed. That was the moment I pushed open the door and walked in. The air in the lawyer's office went flat. Silence, stiff and awkward, like the kind that falls over a church when someone drops a hymn book. Stephen, my eldest, turned pale, then blotchy, like he'd swallowed something wrong. Next to him, my daughter-in-law Judith clutched her expensive purse like it could protect her. The others just gawked. "I see I wasn't expected," I said slowly, letting my cane tap the hardwood floor as I stepped closer. "Good afternoon." The lawyer, Mr. Carlton, still with the same mustache he'd had in 1984, stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his water glass. "Mrs. McRae, we thought—" "Yes, you thought I was dead." That broke the silence. Judith coughed, someone muttered, "Jesus," and Stephen rose halfway from his chair. "Mom, sit." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I handed Mr. Carlton a large envelope. "This is the updated will, signed, notarized, filed. I trust you'll disregard the version you were about to read aloud." His hands shook as he took it. "This is extremely unusual." I looked around the room at the faces that, just a moment ago, were planning the distribution of my life's work like party favors. Not a single tear had been shed. Not even a moment of silence for the woman they thought they'd buried 2 days ago. And that was only the beginning. 2 weeks earlier, I was lying in a narrow bed at Fairhaven Rehabilitation, staring at the water stains on the ceiling and wondering how long I'd last. A stroke, the doctors said. Mild, but enough to scare them. My speech was slurred. My right leg didn't move quite right. I was 78, and for the first time, I felt every year of it. Stephen had nodded solemnly by my bedside that day, told the staff he'd take care of everything. "Get some rest, Mom," he'd said. "Don't worry about a thing." I didn't. Not at first. I thought I had time. I thought I had family. But it was the nurse, Delia, a sharp-eyed woman with soft hands, who gave me the first hint. One morning, while adjusting my pillows, she said, "Your son's been calling a lot. Not asking how you are. Just logistics. Real estate stuff. You must have a nice house." Something inside me clicked. That afternoon, I asked for my bag, the one they'd left in the closet. My phone was still in it, untouched. So were my bank cards. But my key ring was missing. No house key, no safe key. Nothing. I asked Delia to lock the door. Then I called Carlton. "Is anyone trying to access my estate?" I asked. A pause. Then, too careful. "Why do you ask, Mrs. McRae?" That told me everything. Stephen had been preparing. Judith too, no doubt. They had probably drafted speeches already. Maybe even flyers for the charity fund they'd set up in my name. The grieving children of a quietly wealthy matriarch. How noble. They'd underestimated me. I might have been weak, but I wasn't stupid. Not yet. Not ever. The new will was short. Clean. I had rewritten it with a different attorney, one who didn't know my family. One who didn't look at me like I was already gone. I left nothing to Stephen or Judith. Nothing to my youngest, Michael, who hadn't called me in 3 months. Nothing to the granddaughter who only texted when she needed tuition money. The money would go to a trust, one I'd manage while I lived. And after that, it would fund housing and legal aid for elderly women discarded by their families. Women like me. Like so many I'd met at Fairhaven. I gave Delia a copy. Told her to hold it if anything happened to me. And then I walked out of that place, against every discharge recommendation, and took a cab straight to Carlton's office. That's how I ended up in that conference room, watching my family squirm. That's how the real story begins. The bed at Fairhaven was narrow, firm, and smelled faintly of bleach and lavender sachets. Every morning began the same. Fluorescent lights overhead, a knock on the door, the rattle of a food tray. I wasn't hungry. I was never hungry. My appetite had gone with my right hand's strength and my left eye's sharpness. What remained was observation and silence. The staff thought I slept a lot. In truth, I watched. The hallway outside my door was lined with polished linoleum and half-drawn curtains. Some residents screamed, others muttered. I listened to the shuffle of nurses' shoes, the buzz of fluorescent light, the murmurs of daughters who came once a month, sons who spoke in clipped voices. Stephen had brought me here 3 days after the stroke. He'd said it was for my recovery, that this was the best in-state facility, that insurance would cover most of it. I nodded. What else could I do? My tongue was thick then, and my balance poor. But I remember the ride to Fairhaven, how he'd spoken with the air of a man completing a necessary task. Not unkind, just distant. Judith didn't come. Busy with the closing on the cabin, he'd explained. She sends love. She didn't. I spent my days in bed and in a worn armchair near the window. They said movement would return slowly. I didn't believe them. Or maybe I did, but I didn't care. What frightened me more was not the weakness. It was how quickly I had disappeared. The phone barely rang. Michael texted once. "How you feelin'?" No punctuation, no follow-up. My granddaughter Lily posted a picture with a caption, "Visiting Grandma after her Lil's stroke. Still a queen." I wasn't in the photo. Only the lobby orchid and her latte. No one asked what I wanted, what I feared, what I remembered. They all thought I was fading. Delia, the nurse, was the first one who spoke to me like I still existed. "You're sharper than most in this place," she said one morning, helping me into a wheelchair. "I've seen the others. You're not like them." I said nothing. She looked at me for a while, then added, "But your son, he doesn't seem to notice that." I turned my head toward her. "Calls the desk every other day," she went on. "Wants updates, but not the kind that matter. Doesn't ask how you slept or if you've had visitors. Just, you know, how things are. Insurance, discharge timeline, asset stuff." She said it softly, like she wasn't sure she should. Later that day, I asked for my purse. Delia fetched it from the locker and set it on my lap. I opened it slowly. My hands shook, not from nerves but from recovery. Inside was my phone, my wallet, but the key ring was gone. I looked up at her. "Missing something?" "Yes." She hesitated. "I found this in your jacket pocket," she said, reaching into her scrubs and pulling out a single brass key on a red tag. "Thought it might be important." It was the key to my safe deposit box. Not a house key, not a car, just that. One small brass key, ignored because it didn't open anything they could sell. I hid it beneath the lining of my pillow and stared at the ceiling all night. That was the moment something shifted. The next morning, I asked Delia to close the door. "Can you help me make a phone call?" I asked. "Private." She didn't hesitate. She brought the cordless, dialed for me, then placed it in my hand and walked out. I called Carlton's office, spoke to his assistant. "Is anyone accessing my documents?" I asked. A pause. "I'm sorry, Mrs. McRae, but I can't disclose. This is my legal property. I'm asking if anyone has requested or updated my will." Another pause. Then the sound of keyboard tapping. I see there was a request last Friday. Your son requested a certified copy of the last executed will. It was sent to his email. I said thank you and hung up. That evening, I made another call, not to Carlton, to a name Delia gave me, a younger lawyer, someone outside the family's network. I want to draft a new will, I said. Immediately, quietly. She didn't ask why, just gave me an address and said, I'll come to you. I spent the night making lists, not of assets, but of people who had loved me, who had used me, who had visited me in the hospital when I broke my hip 10 years ago, who had laughed when I mixed up their birthdays, who had remembered me at all, and who hadn't. By morning, I was ready. Not out of vengeance. I don't believe in revenge, but out of clarity. Out of the ache that comes when you realize you raised children who see you as a wallet with a heartbeat. Let them laugh about my money. Let them think I'm done. I was just getting started. Mornings at Fairhaven had a rhythm, and once I learned it, I started using it. The early rounds, the medication cart, the soft hum of the breakfast TV in the lounge. The staff thought I was just another fading mind in a chair. Good. Let them think that. Delia saw through it, of course. She watched me with a kind of wary respect, like she knew something inside me was sharpening instead of dulling. On the fourth morning, she wheeled me into the therapy room. While the others watched a game show or dozed in their recliners, I asked her quietly, "Do you have a minute?" She nodded and wheeled me closer to the window, away from the others. I pointed to my lap where a notebook rested. I'd written questions in block letters. My right hand still shook too much to write neatly, but the words were clear. The first page read, "What did my son ask when he called?" Delia frowned. "You sure you want to know that?" I didn't nod. I just looked at her. She sighed and leaned against the sill. "First couple days, he asked about your vitals, stroke recovery, timeline. Then he started asking different things." She ticked them off on her fingers. "Whether you had mental clarity, whether you were signing anything, if you remembered things. Then he asked if anyone had a medical proxy on file, and if the doctors thought you could return home." I looked out the window. "Last time he called," she added, "he asked if you had any recent falls or confusion episodes. I told him no, because there weren't." I flipped to the next page in my notebook. "Did he come visit?" "No," she said. "Not once." She didn't ask why I was keeping notes. Didn't comment on the fact that every name I wrote had a red circle or a line drawn through it. She just said, "You want help calling someone?" "I already did," I said quietly. That was the day the new lawyer came. Her name was Gwen. She couldn't have been older than 35, but she didn't speak to me like I was fragile. She wore flat shoes, carried a canvas bag, and had eyes that didn't flinch. We sat in the empty visitor lounge. I asked Delia to stay with us. She didn't speak, but she sat beside me, arms crossed, her presence solid and quiet. Gwen laid out the forms. "We'll do a new will, notarized on site. I brought a mobile notary. You'll need a witness." Delia lifted her hand. "I'll be your witness." I looked at Gwen. "I want it airtight. I want it so if someone tries to fight it, they break their teeth." Gwen didn't blink. "We'll register it digitally, encrypt the file, paper copies in a fireproof vault. I'll file a letter with the registry stating that all prior documents are null." I nodded. "And who are we disinheriting?" she asked, like it was an ordinary thing. I handed her the paper. "Stephen, Michael, Lily, Judith. They'll contest it," I said. Gwen smiled. "Let them. I've seen worse." "And who gets the estate?" she asked. I pulled out a second sheet, just one name. Delia glanced at it but said nothing. Gwen read it, then looked at me. "A trust?" "Yes," I said. "Not just for her. For women like her, staff, retirees, caregivers, women who don't have anyone looking after them." "You want to give it all away?" she asked softly. "No," I said. "I want to give it where it matters." The notary came. We signed. The lawyer packed her bag. Delia walked me back to my room in silence. At the door, I paused. "Thank you," I said. She looked at me. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." I smiled, a thin, tired thing. "I'm not." And I wasn't. Not anymore. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks. Really slept. Without pills, without fear. I didn't dream. I didn't need to. The next morning, Stephen called again. I asked Delia to put it on speaker. "Hi, this is Delia at Fairhaven," she said. "Any change in her mental state?" Stephen asked. "She's alert," Delia said, glancing at me. "Perfectly lucid." Stephen sounded annoyed. "She's still talking about wanting to go home?" "She hasn't said," Delia replied smoothly. "Well, don't encourage it," he said. "We've started prepping the house for market. It's not safe for her to be alone." He hung up before she could reply. I sat there, listening to the silence that followed. "They're selling my house," I said. Delia's jaw tightened. "Trying to." That afternoon, I called Gwen again. "I need to leave Fairhaven," I said. "I need to walk into that room and be the ghost they didn't expect." She said nothing for a moment. Then, "When?" I looked at the calendar. 1 week, I said. "Let them get comfortable." I closed the call and picked up my notebook. There was still one last entry to write. The letter arrived folded in thirds, in a white envelope with no return address. It had the stale scent of something handled too many times. Delia brought it to me during lunch, sliding it under my tray with a quiet, "This came for you." I knew the handwriting before I even unfolded it. Carlton's assistant. Sharp, small, cursive. It was a courtesy copy. A summary of the estate documents Stephen had requested. 5 pages. A breakdown of assets, properties, account balances, all titled under Estate of Yvonne A. McRae, Preliminary Inheritance Planning. My name, as if I were already dead. I read it slowly. Page 1 listed the house, appraised at $1.7 million to page 2. 3 accounts, totaling just under $6 million. Page 3, trust investments, holdings, dividends. Page 4, a footnote indicating Stephen and Michael had both signed preliminary waivers for legal proceedings, contingent upon maternal incapacity or death. They had prepared the ground, carefully, quietly, like good heirs with expensive lawyers. I turned to the last page. Notes in the margin. Probate likely uncontested. She lacks capacity. I sat very still. That last sentence wasn't just careless, it was cruel. As if my mind, my memories, my will had already evaporated. Delia stood beside me, watching my hands. "You okay?" I looked up. "Do you know what probate means?" She nodded. "I do." I smiled thinly. "Then you know I'm not going through it." That afternoon, I asked Delia for my gray coat and the bag I'd hidden behind the dresser, the one with my checkbook, passport, and the final copy of my new will. "I need to go home," I told her. "Just for a visit." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're ready?" I looked down at my hands. They were steadier now. I could walk, slowly, with the cane. My speech was back. My voice felt like mine again. "I'm not sure I was ever gone." She drove me herself. I hadn't been back to the house since the stroke. It looked different. The front hedges were trimmed too short, the roses gone. A security sign I didn't recognize stood in the yard. "Looks like a flip," Delia murmured. I used my old key, the one they didn't know I had. The door opened. The air inside was sharp, unfamiliar. Judith's perfume, lemon cleaner, something metallic. The furniture had changed. My velvet chair was gone. So was the blue china from the sideboard. In their place, sleek grays, brushed chrome, cold glass. It wasn't my house anymore. Not really. We didn't linger. Delia walked with me down the hall to what used to be my bedroom. The bed had been stripped, boxes stacked in the corner. I saw a label on one, "Estate items to review." Another, "Donation or discard." I stared at it for a long time. On the nightstand, my mother's photograph still sat. Somehow they hadn't thrown that out yet. I picked it up, wiped the dust off the glass. Delia said nothing. She waited. Finally, I turned to her. "We're done here." She helped me out to the car. We didn't speak again until we reached Fairhaven. At my room, she asked, "You want me to bring anything from the house?" I shook my head. "They can keep the furniture, but I want that file box, in the attic closet, the one marked legal." She nodded. "I'll get it." I sat in my chair by the window that night, watching the lights flicker in the hallway. Carlton's assistant thought I lacked capacity. My son thought I was safely tucked away. But I wasn't done. They were planning the will reading, and I was planning my entrance. Before they called it an estate, it was just a laundromat on 6th and Clover. One washing machine, 2 dryers, and a cash box I slept with under my bed. That was in 1973. Stephen was 8, Michael still in diapers. My husband, Ray, had just been laid off from the steel plant, and the severance pay was gone within 2 months. We had $300 left. I took $200 and rented the old storefront that used to be a shoe repair place. No one thought it would work. Ray called it something to keep you busy. But I knew what I was doing. I'd worked the desk at a hotel laundry when I was 16. I knew people always needed clean clothes, especially when they didn't have time to do it themselves. The first 2 years, I worked 16-hour days. I lost weight, missed recitals, burned every dinner I tried to make. I learned how to repair a broken belt on a coin-operated washer using nothing but a butter knife and prayer. Ray eventually went back to work, and then, a year later, he didn't come home from it. A heart attack behind the wheel. Dead before the ambulance arrived. The morning after the funeral, I opened the laundromat at 6 a.m. like always. Stephen sat behind the counter that day, legs swinging off the stool. "Are we still poor now?" he asked. "No," I told him. "We're busy." Busy was how I survived. By the time Stephen graduated high school, I had opened a second location, then a third. I bought washers in bulk from a clothing factory upstate, hauled them myself in a rented truck because no one wanted to give a middle-aged widow a business loan. People assumed Ray had left me money. He hadn't. People assumed my sons helped. They didn't. Not because they were bad, just because I never asked them to. I believed, foolishly, that if I handled the money, they would handle the love. Instead, I raised 2 men who believed success was effortless, because I made it look that way. By the time I turned 60, I had a chain of 6 laundromats, and they weren't glamorous, just clean, reliable, affordable. They made me $700,000 a year, and no one knew it but my accountant. The boys never asked. They saw the house, the car, the birthday checks, but they never asked where it came from. Stephen assumed Ray's insurance had been generous. Michael once said, "It must be nice to sit on all that from Dad's work." I didn't correct them. It's strange how pride twists itself, how it can become silence. The hardest part wasn't the work, it was the holidays. Watching Judith open a necklace I'd paid for while thanking Stephen. Listening to Michael talk about legacy as if the money had grown on some family tree. One Christmas, I offered to pay Lily's first year of college tuition. Stephen said, "That's generous, Mom, but let's make it anonymous. We don't want her confused about where the support's coming from." I smiled, said nothing. That was the beginning of my disappearance. Quiet, polite, convenient. Until now. Now they would remember where the money came from, where the effort lived, where the legacy truly began, not in a bank account. In a back room with lint in the corners, coin rolls stacked in a drawer, and a woman who never stopped moving. Ray had hands that were always warm. That's what I remember first. Not his voice, not his laugh, his hands. The way they felt against my back when we danced at county fairs. The way they held our boys after their first fevers. The way they didn't tremble, even when he knew the layoff was coming. We met at a church picnic in 1959. I was 21, he was 26, and already working the plant lines. He brought me lemonade, said my dress was the color of peaches, and asked if I wanted to leave early. I didn't, but I said yes anyway. We married 6 months later. He wasn't poetic, but he was loyal. He fixed everything: leaky pipes, broken strollers, squeaky doors. If I sighed too long at something, he was already in the garage looking for tools. I loved him for that, for his silences, for how he never raised his voice, even when Stephen crashed the bike, even when I cried over bills. We were good together. Not flashy, not romantic in the way people now expect, but steady. He built the boys a treehouse out of old pallets. He taught me how to read a balance sheet before I ever thought about owning a business. When he lost his job, he didn't panic. He made a pot of coffee and told me, "We'll be fine, just gotta reroute." We didn't know then that reroute meant he'd never work again. The heart attack came fast. 1 minute, he was driving home from a side gig, delivering laundry machines, ironically. The next, I was getting a call from the sheriff's office. I remember washing the floors that night. I didn't cry, not until the next morning when Michael asked, "Is Daddy coming to breakfast?" And I had to say no. Ray was 38. I was 33, and suddenly, alone with 2 boys, debt, and no clue what to do next. The laundromat idea wasn't born of ambition. It was born of math. We had enough for 1 month's bills, maybe 2. I remembered Ray once saying, "People always need socks. Clean ones." That stuck with me. So I opened that first place. And every time I wanted to quit, I'd remember his hands. The way they worked without complaint. The way they steadied mine when I doubted myself. When I made my first real profit, not just scraped by, but actually earned. I went to the cemetery and sat beside his stone. I told him everything. How I fixed the broken machine with pliers. How Mrs. Ramos down the block brought her laundry every Wednesday. How I missed him most when the boys fought, and I didn't know who was right. That became my ritual. Every milestone, I told Ray. Every tax season, every expansion. I told him about Stephen's wedding, about Lily's birth, about how quiet the house had become once the boys moved out. And I told him when I sold it all, the chain, the buildings, the machines, how the broker called it a surprising portfolio, how the bank manager offered me champagne. That night, I sat on the bench near Ray's grave with the check folded in my pocket. I told him I did it, that the boys were taken care of, that maybe now I could rest a little. But I never told him how they changed, how they started treating me like a formality, a line in the family tree, a quiet woman who didn't need to be included, just referenced. Maybe I thought if I didn't say it aloud, it wouldn't be real. Maybe I hoped they'd remember their father's hands, but they didn't, and now they never will. The woman waiting in the Fairhaven garden wore a green coat too nice for this place. She sat on the bench under the dogwood tree, one ankle crossed over the other, like she had all the time in the world. When I came around the path, she stood slowly, careful with her knees. "Yvonne McRae," she said, smiling. "Still taller than me, I see." I hadn't seen Noreen Whitman in almost 20 years. We used to meet for lunch once a month, back when the boys were still boys, and we both had hips that didn't crack when we stood up. She hugged me like we'd just seen each other last week. Smelled faintly of rose water and drier sheets. I'd missed that. "You look good," I said, sitting beside her. "You look like hell," she replied, cheerful as ever, "but upright, which, in this place, is winning." We sat in silence for a bit. The wind carried the sound of someone's television through the open lounge window. A game show, I think. Buzzers and forced applause. "I heard about the stroke," Noreen said gently. "From Ed. He still does bookkeeping for the flower shop." "I'm fine now." "Clearly." She nudged my arm. "You're already plotting something. I can see it in your face." I didn't deny it. She studied me for a moment. "They thought they had you, didn't they?" I looked at her. "Did yours try?" She laughed, not bitterly, but with the ease of someone who'd already swallowed that truth and digested it. "Oh, honey, years ago. Right after Charlie passed. My youngest asked if I'd considered moving to a more manageable space. Said he'd help handle the sale. Offered to keep the deed in the family." "And did you?" "No." She leaned back. "I moved the deed to a trust, in my name. Appointed my granddaughter, Cora, as co-trustee. Skipped the whole power of attorney circus." I nodded slowly. "You never told me that." "Well, you had your hands full back then. Building laundromats, fixing washing belts, raising men." We both chuckled, though the sound had edges. "Did it hurt?" I asked quietly. "Making that choice?" "No. What hurt was realizing I had to." She looked at me. "You always gave too much, Yvonne. Even back in church group. You baked enough for 20 when you were only asked for 6. I smiled faintly. "You never said that." "You weren't ready to hear it." She reached into her bag and pulled out a photo, a little snapshot, frayed at the edges. A young woman, maybe 20, holding a baby on a blanket in the sun. "Cora," she said, "my co-trustee. She still calls every Sunday. She brought me here today. She knows. She knows everything." Noreen looked at me, eyes steady. "Your people. They don't, do they?" I shook my head. "Then you do what I did. You write your name back into the center of the story. You make your will the loudest thing they'll hear." I looked down at my hands. "They're planning to read it soon, the old one. Stephen thinks he's getting it all." Noreen's laugh this time was sharper. Let him. Let him wear a new suit. Let them all bring their greedy little ears. And then? And then you walk in silence. Let them feel the ground shift. We sat there a while longer, 2 old women under a tree, watching the wind scatter petals across the walkway. The quiet had a kind of grace to it. Before she left, Noreen kissed my cheek and said, "They forgot who you were. That's their mistake." It was, and soon they'd remember. Gwen arrived early. Too early for most lawyers, but right on time for someone who understood what urgency really meant. She carried no briefcase this time, just a slim folder, her phone, and that calm, even voice that never once slid into pity. We sat in the visitor's room again. No flowers, no paintings, just beige walls and 2 vinyl chairs. Perfect for what we were about to do. "I've prepared everything," she said, handing me the folder. "Here's the formal trust. Here's the letter of revocation for all prior wills. And here's the documentation naming the new executor." I nodded. My fingers brushed the signature lines. "The trust is named the McRae Foundation for Dignity in Aging," she added. "Is that still what you want?" "Yes." "Primary beneficiary is the trust itself. Secondary, if the trust dissolves, is Delia Whitaker." I smiled. "Exactly." She watched me sign each page with slow, careful strokes. My hand wasn't perfect yet. The letters leaned, the lines wobbled. But they were mine. The signature at the bottom of every page was not forged, not assisted. No one could question my intent. "Do you want to leave a statement?" she asked when we were done. "Something to be read with the will?" "No," I said. "Let the silence be the statement." Gwen didn't smile often, but she did then. Before she left, she passed me a final envelope. "Here's your official copy. I'll file the rest. Legally, it's ironclad. They can contest all they like, but they won't win." I took the envelope in both hands, then looked up at her. "Will it make them hate me?" She tilted her head. "If they do, they already did. They were just quiet about it." That stayed with me. The rest of the week I prepared quietly. Delia brought me clothes from the dry cleaner, my navy dress, the one with the high collar and the soft shoulders, low black shoes, a pair of small pearl earrings I hadn't worn since Stephen's wedding, back when Judith still called me Mom, not her. We practiced walking across the hall, down the garden path. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. I was not there to make an entrance. I was there to remind them I existed. "Sure you want to do this?" Delia asked the night before. I sat in the armchair, looking at my reflection in the window. They held a funeral in their minds. This isn't revenge. It's resurrection. She didn't reply, but her eyes softened. The morning of the reading, Delia drove me. I sat in the passenger seat with the envelope in my lap, unopened. I didn't need to read it again. I knew what it said. Every clause, every condition. I had written it not in haste, but in clarity. The lawyer's office was in a glass building, too modern for its own good. Polished floors, wide windows, artificial plants. Carlton's assistant looked up as we entered and went pale. "Mrs. McRae." "I have an appointment," I said, stepping forward. My cane tapped once, then again, steady as a metronome. "They're already inside." "Good." I looked at Delia. She nodded once. "I'll wait outside." "No, come in with me." She blinked. "You sure?" "Yes. You're the only one who deserves to hear this." We walked through the door together, just as Stephen said the words I'd waited 2 weeks to hear. "Finally, we're splitting Mom's $8 million. I stepped inside, and the room forgot how to breathe. Carlton stood as I entered, nearly knocking over a stack of folders in his rush. "Mrs. McRae?" he breathed, as if I were a ghost stepping out of his past. We didn't know." "No, you didn't," I said. My voice was clear, steady, and softer than I intended. But in that room, even a whisper would have carried. Stephen was frozen halfway to standing. Judith clutched her pearls like someone had set off a fire alarm. Michael blinked, then looked behind me, as if hoping I was a hallucination followed by a nurse with a chart. Only Lily spoke. "Grandma?" "Hello, Lily," I said, not unkindly. No one else moved. I turned to Carlton and extended the envelope. You were about to read an outdated document. This is the current one. He hesitated. Signed, notarized, witnessed, filed, I added. Legally sound. Would you like to verify? Yes, of course. He took it with shaking hands, sat down slowly, and scanned the first page. The color drained from his face before he'd even hit the second clause. Judith found her voice first. Wait, what is this? Carlton looked at her, then at Stephen. This is a new will, superseding all prior documents. Stephen leaned forward. You told me she was... He stopped short, swallowed. We had a conversation. You said... I said nothing, Carlton replied quickly. You requested a copy. I provided it. That's all. What does it say? Michael asked. What's in the new one? Carlton adjusted his glasses. The entire estate, all liquid assets, property, and investments, have been placed into a private trust. The trust is designed to fund a nonprofit foundation. A what? Judith snapped. Dedicated to supporting elderly women in transitional care? Carlton finished. The silence that followed was long and sharp. You're joking, Stephen said. I finally stepped fully into the room, the cane clicking against the tile. Does this look like a joke, Stephen? He stood. You can't do this. I already did. You're not thinking clearly, Judith chimed in. This is elder manipulation. Someone got to you. Who put you up to this? Was it a nurse? One of those... Careful, I said. Just that. Nothing more. Carlton cleared his throat. The will includes a statement of mental capacity signed by 2 physicians, dates, signatures, evaluations. There is no indication of coercion. All legal standards have been met. You lied to us, Michael said suddenly, as if the words surprised even him. You let us think. No, I interrupted. You decided what you wanted to believe. You heard stroke and thought finish line. You saw my silence and mistook it for permission. You started the division of a life before it had ended. But we're your family. Judith's voice cracked. You can't just give it all away to strangers. I looked at her. I gave it away to people who won't forget I'm still breathing. Stephen's voice was low now, dangerous in its restraint. What about us? What are we supposed to do? I met his gaze. Adapt. Like I did when your father died. Like I did when none of you came to the hospital. Like I did when you began to speak of me in past tense. You don't understand, he snapped. We had plans. Lily's college. The cabin. Retirement. None of that was mine to plan, I said. And yet, somehow, you did. Lily hadn't moved. She looked at me quietly, the only one not burning with indignation. I softened my voice. You're in the trust's care plan, Lily. Tuition included. You're the only one who called. Her eyes welled up, but she nodded without speaking. Stephen gripped the edge of the table. You're punishing us. No, I said. I'm remembering myself. And with that, I turned and walked out. Delia stood in the hallway, waiting. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. We walked back to the elevator, step by step. Each movement slow, certain, final. Behind us, the silence in that room stretched wide and heavy. The diner was quiet, the kind of place where the coffee never stopped flowing, and no one asked questions about tears in the middle of the afternoon. Delia dropped me off and went to pick up a prescription. Said she'd be back in an hour. I sat by the window, ordered tea I wouldn't drink, and watched a couple of teenagers cross the parking lot, arms tangled like vines. For a moment, I remembered being 21. Ray's hand in mine, The way we used to sneak off after Sunday service just to sit in silence behind the hardware store. The door chimed. Lily stepped inside. She spotted me, hesitated just long enough to make me think she might leave, then walked over and sat across from me. She didn't speak at first, just took off her jacket, folded it too carefully, like a nervous habit. "You came," I said. "I didn't know if I should." "You didn't have to." She looked up. Her eyes were red but dry now. "I wanted to." A waitress appeared, took her order. Coffee, black. Same as mine used to be before the blood pressure warnings. "I didn't know," Lily said once we were alone. "About the will, about any of it." "I believe you." She picked at the corner of the napkin. "Dad's furious." "Mom's not speaking. Michael left right after you did." "I expected all of that." "I think they're going to try to fight it." "They can try." She nodded, then looked at me with something like grief. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you still looked at me like I was yours," I said quietly. "Not like I was a wallet that hadn't closed yet." She winced. "They weren't always like that." "No, but they were like that long enough." She was quiet. The waitress returned, set down her coffee, disappeared again. "I don't want your money," Lily said suddenly. "I know. I wish we'd talked more, before all this. I feel like I missed something." I reached across the table. My hand landed gently over hers. Her skin was cold, her fingers twitchy. "You didn't miss anything," I said. "You saw what mattered." She took a breath like she wanted to say something else, then shook her head. "Mom used to say you were old-fashioned, that you didn't understand what things were like for us. I think maybe we didn't understand what things were like for you." "I didn't explain it well," I admitted. "I thought giving was enough." "It should be," she whispered. "Yes. But people forget what came before the giving, what it cost." We sat there, the two of us, not quite family and not quite strangers. She wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't her sweet old grandma with a dish of hard candy on the table. We were just two women, finally meeting in the middle of the truth. "Do you hate them?" she asked. "No, but I've stopped excusing them." Lily nodded. She didn't try to defend them again. She didn't need to. When Delia returned, I stood up slowly, steadying myself on the table. Lily rose too. "Will I see you again?" she asked. "If you want to," I said. "But not because of anything I can give you." She hugged me, quick, firm, and not for show. "I just want you," she said. For the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The house was quiet when I returned. Too quiet. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, but expectant. Like the walls themselves were waiting for someone to apologize. Delia helped me to the porch, unlocked the door with the spare key I had retrieved weeks ago from its hiding spot under the ceramic frog. A ridiculous thing Ray once insisted on placing there, saying it gave character. I used to laugh at him for it. Now I couldn't bring myself to move it. "You want me to stay a while?" Delia asked. "No," I said. "This part I need to do alone." She nodded, no offense taken, and disappeared down the walk, her car purring softly as she pulled away. I stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the air hit me. It didn't smell like lemons anymore. Judith's obsession with chemical cleanliness had left the place flat and odorless. Even the wood seemed muted. I walked into the living room. Everything was still staged from the market-ready photos. Neutral tones. Throw pillows too stiff to use. My curtains replaced with modern gray panels that matched nothing. The piano was gone. So were the quilts. Even the clock had been changed. No more ticking, just digital numbers on a blank screen. It was a house now, not a home. I made my way to the kitchen. The chair I always sat in, my chair, was missing. They'd probably thrown it out, thinking no one would want something with that many years in its cushions. I leaned against the counter, closed my eyes, and suddenly I was back. Ray standing by the stove, trying to make pancakes and burning every single one. Stephen at 10, dragging in a science project with string and baking soda. Michael with his knees scraped, asking for a kiss to fix it. Christmas mornings with ribbon tangled in the table legs. Lily, barely walking, pressing her palms against the glass door, shouting, "Snow, snow." I opened my eyes again. It was all gone. But it had happened. That mattered. I went into the bedroom next. They'd boxed everything. My clothes, my shoes, even my brush and old perfume bottle. On top of the dresser was a stack of files labeled "to shred." My handwriting stared back at me from one envelope. Notes I'd once made on burial instructions. Preferences. Thoughts. Stephen must have assumed I'd written them as a guide. He hadn't read far enough to see the last line. "Don't bury me until I've had the last word." I sat on the edge of the bed, not the one I'd slept in for decades, but the new one, sterile and squared off. My body was tired, more tired than I'd let anyone see. But inside, something felt weightless. I'd done it. For once, I hadn't waited too long. I hadn't let them write the ending for me. I reached for the folder I'd brought, my copy of the will, the trust, the closure. I set it on the nightstand, not out of pride, out of proof, in case I ever doubted again that I had spoken clearly, that I had reclaimed something. The phone rang in the kitchen. I didn't move. Let them call. Let them fill voicemail boxes and text bubbles with apologies wrapped in explanations. I didn't need to hear them. For now, the only voice I wanted in my head was my own. The first letter came 2 days after I moved back in. Cream envelope, heavy paper, return address embossed in silver. Stephen had spared no expense. The contents were what I expected. A formal concern about my mental state. A request to pause execution of the new will, and a subtle threat masked as concern. "We only want what's best for you, Mother. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." I folded it neatly and dropped it into the wastebasket. The next morning, an email arrived. Michael this time. Less polished, more direct. "I don't know what kind of advice you're getting, but you're being reckless. This isn't you." Funny how people say that. This isn't you. When what they really mean is, this isn't the version of you I prefer. Judith called. Left a voicemail I didn't bother to check. Then another. Then texted. Judith. "We should talk. This isn't healthy. You're isolating." Judith. "Stephen says you've changed. I agree." Judith. "We're just trying to protect what Dad built." I stared at that one for a long time. Ray hadn't built this. He'd helped me build it, but it was mine. The weight of it, the worry of it, the years. They lived in my spine, in my knuckles, in my knees that crackled every time I stood up too fast. They weren't angry because I had changed. They were angry because I had stopped pretending. The third day, they came to the door. I was in the garden, trimming dead leaves off a rose bush that had miraculously survived Judith's landscaping. I saw their car pull in, sleek, leased, something too smooth for our gravel driveway. Stephen got out first. Suit jacket, tie, polished shoes. Like he thought dressing like a banker would help his case. Judith followed in beige and black, her heels catching slightly in the cracks of the walk. "Mother," Stephen called. I kept clipping. "Mother," louder this time. "I have a name," I said without looking up. He exhaled like a man trying to practice patience he hadn't actually earned. "We need to talk." "Then talk. In private. This is my home. If it needs privacy, it needs honesty." They stood there, shifting uncomfortably. "You've been manipulated," Judith said finally. "This Delia woman, she's not a woman," I cut in. "She's a person. And she's the only one who sat with me when I couldn't speak." Stephen took a step forward. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said. "I made one 20 years ago when I let you think money would always come with silence." He flinched. "We just want to help," Judith said, almost pleading. "There's no shame in needing guidance at your age. I needed it when Ray died. I needed it when I took out a second mortgage to keep Michael in college. I needed it when you both sat in my kitchen and told me I should sell the business because it was too much for a woman my age. I asked for help then. No one offered." They didn't respond. I finally stood, brushing dirt from my gloves. "You came here for something. Say it." Stephen looked at Judith, then back at me. "We want to contest the will." I nodded. "You can try." "You really want your legacy tied up in court?" Judith asked. "You want strangers reading through your finances, picking apart your health records?" "If that's the cost of telling the truth," I said, "so be it." They stood there a moment longer, as if waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. When they turned to leave, Judith looked back once. Her face wasn't angry anymore. "Just tired," but I wasn't tired. Not anymore. The letter from the lawyer came in a manila envelope with too many stamps and too much confidence. The firm's name was embossed in dark green. Stephen had spared no expense. Again. "Petition for incapacity review. Filed in county court. Signed. Stamped. Scheduled." They were contesting the will after all. Not on the grounds of fairness, but fitness. They wanted to prove I hadn't known what I was doing, that Delia had swayed me, that my mind was brittle enough to crack under suggestion. I read it twice, then once more. No anger, no panic, just a steady, familiar ache, like an old joint waking up before rain. Delia found me in the kitchen, the papers open on the table beside my tea. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "They're not." We called Gwen that afternoon. She didn't flinch. "Let them come," she said. "We'll submit the evaluations, the audio recordings, the full chain of custody. They'll lose before they're seated." And they did. 2 weeks later, the judge dismissed the petition before it reached hearing. The documents were clear. The medical statement strong. The will airtight. Gwen had prepared for every angle. Still, Stephen's lawyer sent one more letter. This one was softer. A final appeal to resolve things amicably. A suggestion of compromise. Perhaps a small disbursement. A gesture. I tore it in half. I didn't want to punish them. I just didn't want to pretend anymore. The trust launched quietly. Gwen helped me register the nonprofit, open the accounts, begin the first phase of disbursements. We named the first fund after Ray. "The Raymond Grant for Independent Housing," Delia cried when I told her. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," I said. "That's why it matters." She moved into the upstairs room a week later, not as a caretaker, as a tenant, paid rent, mowed the lawn, brought in the mail when I forgot. But at night, we drank tea in the kitchen and talked about everything that used to go unsaid. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, the house felt full without being crowded. Stephen stopped calling. Judith sent one final text, a cold apology wrapped in false grace. Michael sent nothing. Lily came once a week. She brought fresh bread, books I hadn't read, and news from campus. She sat on the porch with me and listened, really listened, the way no one had in years. "You're not angry anymore," she said once. "No," I said, "just clear." She nodded like she understood. The newspapers didn't cover it. There was no headline, no scandal, no revelation. Just a woman, old and forgotten, who remembered herself in time. But word got around, quietly, from one woman to another. The neighbor who asked me how I'd set up the trust. The nurse at Fairhaven who wrote me a letter asking if I could help her mother. The woman from church who sent a card with nothing inside but her phone number and the words, "I think I'm ready." Sometimes all it takes is one person choosing not to disappear. Sometimes that's the whole revolution. And I hadn't planned it that way. I didn't want to be a symbol. I just didn't want to die quietly in the margins of someone else's balance sheet. I sat on the porch one morning in late October, a shawl around my shoulders, the sunlight soft. Delia brought out 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside me. "You're thinking," she said, "always. About them?" "No," I said. "About how long it took to say, no more." She nodded. "But you said it." "Yes, and I meant it." The wind stirred the trees, slow and sure. And for once, I wasn't waiting for anything. The mornings came soft now. No more alarms, no scheduled blood draws, no footsteps echoing in long, sterile halls. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of the paper as I unfolded it, even though I rarely read more than the weather. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. I rose slowly, not from pain, though there was always some, but from patience. The body learns not to rush once it's been betrayed. I poured a cup of coffee, not too hot, with 1 spoon of sugar, and sat in the chair by the window. The good one. The one Stephen had wanted to replace with something more modern. I had it brought back. Paid the movers myself. It creaked when I sat. I smiled when it did. Across the street, the widow Reynolds watered her porch plants in a robe and fuzzy socks. She waved when she saw me. I lifted my cup in reply. We'd never been close, but we'd both aged enough to not need reasons for kindness. Inside, Delia moved quietly. She had her own rhythm. Morning yoga, music in the kitchen. Today, it was something soft and slow. A woman's voice from the 60s, all breath and gravel. "You want toast?" she called. "Just one." She made 2 anyway. Added jam. At 10, the mail came. A letter from the bank, one from the foundation, and a thank you card from a woman named Beatrice, whose mother had received her first housing grant the month before. She cried when we signed the lease, the card read. Said it felt like someone remembered she was still here. I pinned it to the board by the door, next to Lily's last postcard, next to the photo of Ray at the laundromat, holding up a busted belt like he'd just discovered gold. The house was still mine, not just by deed, but by feel. The corners had softened again. The furniture belonged. The fridge was full of things I chose. No more meal kits, no more protein shakes, no one asked if I liked. In the afternoons, I wrote letters. Not long ones, just a few sentences. I wrote to women I'd known in my life and lost touch with. To the church secretary who used to bring extra bulletins to Ray when he couldn't make it. To the girl who bagged my groceries the year the storm knocked out power for 3 days. To a former employee I hadn't seen since 1998. Not all wrote back, but some did. And that was enough. One evening, I walked the garden path out back. Delia had replanted the roses, not for aesthetics, but for memory. She said things should grow where things once bloomed. I passed the old bench and sat down. From here, I could see the windows lit up. My house, still mine. Not an asset, not an inheritance, just a place where my breath lived. I thought of Stephen, of Michael, of Judith. Not with bitterness, just with distance. Like remembering an old ache, something the body doesn't forget, but no longer fears. I didn't wonder if they'd ever call again. That wasn't the point. The point was, I hadn't waited for them to give me permission to live. There was no ceremony, no headlines, no ribbon cutting. The foundation opened its doors in a converted bungalow near the edge of town, once a dental office, now painted in warm yellows and soft grays. The sign out front read simply, "The McRae Foundation, Dignity, Shelter, Voice." I didn't speak at the opening, didn't pose for a photo. I stood in the back, near the hallway that led to the first 3 rooms now furnished for women with nowhere else to go. There was a woman named Clarice in room 1, 72, evicted after her daughter moved states and stopped paying the rent. In room 2, Anita, a retired nursing aide whose knees had given out before her retirement did. Room 3 hadn't been filled yet, but the bed was made. Delia gave the tour. Lily handled the paperwork. I stood and watched. Afterward, we went home. No champagne, just tea and shortbread. That night, I sat on the porch again. Same shawl, same quiet air. The wind had shifted, cooler now. Autumn gathering in the corners of the yard. Lily came out and sat beside me. She was taller than I remembered. Not by inches, by presence. She hadn't just changed. She'd become. "I talked to Dad," she said. I looked at her. "He said I betrayed him," she added, voice low. "Said I took your side." "There aren't sides," I said. "There are just choices." I told him that. He hung up. We sat a while. "Do you think he'll come around?" she asked. "No." "You okay with that?" I thought about it. "I'm not angry," I said. "But I'm not waiting." She reached over, squeezed my hand. "People always think forgiveness is a door you leave open," I said after a moment. "But sometimes it's just a light you turn off so you can sleep." Lily nodded. "You slept last night?" "For the first time in years." A week later, I received a letter. No return address. Inside, a photo. Me, Ray, and the boys. Summer of '81. At the lake. Someone must have had a copy. On the back, in Stephen's handwriting, "We did love you. We just didn't show it right." No signature, no apology. Just that. I didn't write back. I didn't throw it away either. I pinned it beside Beatrice's card. Sometimes truth comes late. Sometimes it doesn't come at all. You live anyway. You rebuild. Quietly. Fully. If you're reading this, and you're a daughter, or a mother, or someone who's ever been told to wait quietly while others decide what's best for you, I'll tell you what no one told me soon enough. You are not a placeholder. You are not an asset. And you do not owe your silence in exchange for being tolerated. Your voice is not too late. Your memory is not expired. Your power does not need permission. Tell your story. And if you already have, tell it louder.